Accusations, casualties, and chilling revelations. Israel's being tested like never before. While the UN recklessly accuses Israel of causing famine in Gaza, the IDF readies a full assault on Gaza City, even as it mourns the death of a young commander. And across the ocean, President Trump drops a bombshell. Fewer than 20 hostages may still be alive. Family's real. Israeli officials deny it, but the question haunts the nation. How many captives remain, and how much time is left? Stay tuned for today's Jerusalem Minute. Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS. I am here at the JNS Media Hub in Jerusalem. Across the ocean is Alex Traiman, the CEO of JNS. We're going to get started, Alex, with some breaking news happening right now as being reported on jns.org. Israeli Air Force conducting strikes in Yemen's capital of Sanaa. This comes just several days after the Houthis launched a ballistic missile at the state of Israel. It's believed that for the first time they are using cluster munitions. Looks like that is being confirmed by Israel's military. They continue to launch drones, continue to launch ballistic missiles, and it looks like they've upped the level of attacks as of this Friday night.
Well, cluster bomb is much more serious than the ballistic missiles that the Houthis have been firing regularly. They've fired hundreds and hundreds of rockets at Israel since October 7th. But cluster bombs, what they do is at a certain altitude, they then break up into as many as 20 smaller pieces. So it makes interception much more complicated because they can explode munitions in 20 different places after the bomb breaks apart. So it certainly makes it much more dangerous if the missile enters into the atmosphere. Israel has the ability and does intercept many of these missiles in the atmosphere, but Israel's missile defense is not a flawless system. It's a high percentage system, but some do get through, and we're seeing that they're upping their game. And what needs to be understood also is that they didn't come up with their own program. This is an Iranian ballistic missile program. So just because Iran is not firing at us directly, this is an Iranian proxy that is being funded and supplied with missiles, ballistic missiles, and now for the first time, cluster missiles to attack Israel. They've been doing that nonstop since October 8th, I believe, the day after October 7th. When I was in Washington with the prime minister, one of the things that surprised me was the prime minister said that he was ready, that Israel was ready to launch a mass scale attack on the Houthis in Yemen, similar to the 12-day operation that Israel had launched in Iran. And at the time, Netanyahu stated that the United States was the one who started the attacks in Yemen. Remember, they fired at over 1,000 strategic targets over a period of about 2 months. Several months back. He said just as the Americans started the operation in Yemen, Israel would finish it. He said it was a reverse of what happened in Israel, where Israel started the 12-day war and the United States came in with Operation Midnight Hammer and essentially finished it. And we haven't seen that yet. Perhaps the firing of cluster bombs for the first time will be that trigger that forces Israel to sustain a longer action, and it's not known what it's going to take for Israel to be able to finally deter the Houthis from firing more missiles. Will it mean a series of attacks, escalating the attacks in Yemen? At the time, I spoke with several ministers in the Israeli government, high-ranking officials, and they had said, already dating back several months, they just thought that the Houthis would stop once a ceasefire was reached in Gaza. Clearly, no ceasefire in Gaza has been reached. And as you can see from the cluster bomb attack on Friday, the Houthis just continue to fire at Israel and to increase the level of their attacks.
Alex, right this second, I'm looking at images from the capital there in Yemen of Sanaa, big plumes of smoke over the capital right now. And in regard to those cluster bombs, Iran did, in fact, during that 12-day war, they did, in fact, use that weapon when targeting Israel. I distinctly remember, I believe, in the hospital there in the south, as well as Tel Aviv, they did use those type of munitions before, correct?
That's right. We saw later in the 12-day war, it wasn't from the beginning, but they started using cluster bombs. And the cluster bombs are, in addition to striking it in different places, they become much harder to intercept if they break apart before Israel's able to intercept up in the atmosphere. So it's definitely a much more complex missile. And yes, they're getting these from Iran. And, Israel has to be able to deter enemies from attacking. We see that they've deterred Hamas from attacking the Israeli home front for the most part. They have completely deterred Hezbollah, and yet the Houthis still feel free to send ballistic missiles towards Israel. They also feel free to interrupt commercial shipping that is headed towards Israel and is going through the Suez Canal, and they need to be stopped. The United States and the international community should have stopped the Houthis because interrupting international shipping is, causes belly for war. The Suez Canal is one of the world's busiest commercial waterways, and the fact that shipping companies and insurance companies won't take the risk of allowing ships to go through the Suez Canal, which is taking tons and tons of commercial goods from China to Europe and elsewhere. It's a little bit embarrassing that people are leaving this for Israel, but Israel's going to do the world's dirty work once again. I think that Israel was hoping that the Houthi problem would just go away, but certainly now, if they're going to scale up the attacks to the point where it becomes much harder for Israel's missile defense to intercept these cluster bombs, that Israel will have no choice but to attack. Now, how do you attack? How do you attack a terror organization that's over 1,000 miles away? This isn't a state like Iran. Iran had state infrastructure that Israel was able to target more effectively. Here, the Houthis are they're firing these missiles off of trucks, and they pop up in different places, and it's hard for Israel to find where the Houthis are. Unless they're going to continue with sustained attacks. They don't have the same amount of intelligence assets inside Yemen as they did inside Iran. Israel hadn't been planning before October 7th for any kind of war whatsoever against the Houthis in Yemen. They never perceived that the Houthis were a threat to Israel directly. They thought it was an Iranian front proxy that was stationed there to attack Saudi Arabia, not to attack Israel. So what Israel's been doing is they've been attacking at a large national infrastructure like the port. They attacked the Hodeidah port many times. They attacked and completely obliterated the Sanaa airport. There's no airport in Yemen anymore. They have attacked at power plants and oil refineries. Large scale attacks to send a message to the Houthis, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily targeting specifically the missile launchers that are mobile missile launchers. And so even as Israel sends Yemen, which isn't a very developed country, back into the dark ages, it doesn't necessarily prevent the Houthis from continuing to fire ballistic missiles at Israel.
Alex, Meet Segel, Israeli prominent journalist, is saying, in the crosshairs, the presidential palace and the assassination of senior officials. So this might be a major Israeli strike on Yemen. I would just encourage people to go to jns.org for all the latest. We'll have to see how this plays out.
It could be a major major escalation. Until now, the Houthis, when they've been firing the ballistic missiles, have been firing them almost one at a time. Sometimes one at a time, sometimes two at a time. It's not like we saw with Iran where the Houthis are firing the Iranians were firing major barrages of missiles. The Houthis have sort of been, lobbing one at a time, and Israel's been much more easily intercepting those missile attacks. If Israel is now stepping it up and is attacking against state infrastructure and leadership of the Houthis of Yemen, Israel might have to brace itself for much more serious attacks where the Houthis will be firing many more ballistic missiles at one time, overrunning Israel's missile defense. At the same time, if they do that, and if Israel is now going to start running sorties toward Yemen continuously the way they were against Iran, then Israel would have the opportunity to do real-time surveillance to see exactly where these ballistic missiles are being launched from, and hopefully to take out the ballistic missile launchers. I haven't seen any accurate estimates put out yet of how many ballistic missile launchers it's believed that the Houthis have. So we don't know what's their capacity. And even before the war with Iran, there were estimates that, Iran had as many as 3,000 ballistic missiles, maybe half of them with the ability to reach Israel. And we know that, Israel degraded Iran's ballistic missile capabilities by over 50%. We know that they degraded their ability to launch missiles, hit missile launchers by approximately 80%, to the point where Iran didn't want to continue firing because every time they fire, they would turn that missile launcher into a target for an immediate Israeli counterstrike. So we don't know exactly how much capacity the Houthis have to fire at Israel, but we could be headed towards a major escalation, both in terms of Israeli attacks on the Houthis in Yemen and also on incoming ballistic missiles.
We might have a long night ahead of us here in Israel. To be continued. Alex, I was going to open the show talking about the fact that Israel now has been formally accused of causing famine in Gaza. This UN-backed IPC organization, Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Analysis, they released a report backed by the World Health Organization and others, claiming that Israel is causing starvation in Gaza. Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu, immediately released a statement saying that this is an outright lie. The IPC report is absolutely fake and a modern-day blood libel. Yet, of course, this type of report plays into the hands of the Israel haters, already spreading over the weekend like wildfire, with all of these organizations, I would say phony human rights organizations, backing the findings of this report, which Israel took. If you see the text there from the Prime Minister's office, they went one by one debunking this IPC report.
Yeah, exactly. And the IPC, they're the ones officially who do report on when there is starvation taking place across the world, and people over the years have relied on the IPC's analysis of when starvation is being caused. And until the war with Gaza, the IPC was seen as a neutral body, simply identifying where there was starvation. And the IPC has specific analysis points that it uses when to determine whether there is starvation in a place. And what we've seen happen here with regard to the Gaza war on the claim of starvation, as we saw on the claim of genocide, as we're seeing on the claim of war crimes and other accusations hurled at Israel, what's happening in the Israel-Gaza war is that organizations like the IPC are suddenly, for the first time, changing their standard. Right. So if they were stating previously that there needed to be, 30% of people in acute hunger to be called starvation, now what they're doing is that they are lowering the standard. Okay. And stating, well, yeah, I guess in the past, we didn't classify starvation until we reached a certain benchmark. But in this case, what we can see now is that there really is starvation, even though that benchmark hasn't been reached or hasn't even come close. So this is what's happening here, that we see that the standards change. This is called the double standard, right? And when Natan Sharansky he identified what he called the 3 Ds of anti-Semitism. It was a delegitimization, double standard, demonization. And so certainly the whole purpose of the media has been to demonize and delegitimize Israel, and the international organizations which are hurling these blood libels on Israel. First, genocide as a policy, which we see now that 2 years on, and Israel clearly doesn't have a policy of genocide, because if Israel had a policy of genocide, there wouldn't be Palestinians living in Gaza. Israel doesn't have a policy of starvation. If they had a policy of starvation, they wouldn't have sent in, since the war started, over 2 million tons of food. That's 1 ton of food per person that Israel has supplied in. It's more than any any military has pumped into an enemy population during wartime, right? But what we see the IPC doing, what everybody else is doing, is creating a false double standard, saying, okay, in any other war situation, this would not be classified as genocide. This would just be called war. This would not be classified as starvation. This would just be, classified as the difficulties of war. Meanwhile, all these difficulties brought on the Gazan people by Hamas. This was the plan of Hamas to get the international community to call it genocide. If the genocide doesn't stick, let's now call it starvation. Let's use pictures of little babies that have cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy and get those into the New York Times so that people could see how horrific is the starvation. But these are double standards that only apply to Israel. There's a new standard for starvation. It only applies to Israel. It only applies to the situation in Gaza. It's really disgusting, but this is what Israel faces in wartime by the international community.
Yeah, holding Israel, the one and only Jewish state, to a different standard certainly fits that Sharansky definition of anti-Semitism. At the same time, Alex, the IDF is prepping for a Gaza City mission. The IDF has begun with 4 brigades maneuvering on the outskirts of Gaza City and surrounding neighborhoods. On Thursday, Prime Minister Netanyahu approved the plans to resume the ground operation in Gaza and to capture Gaza City. We'll have to see, obviously, if the IDF does decide to go forward. At the same time, unfortunately, Lieutenant Ori Gerlich, 20 years old, from Eitar, fell in battle. The IDF announced Saturday evening he was a platoon commander in the Shimshon battalion of the Kfir Brigade, and he died in what appears to be some sort of military accident on the way to carry out some sort of maneuver against Hamas, and it looks like the weapons he had on him, something detonated prematurely, and unfortunately he was killed.
Well, certainly, seeing horrific battles taking place inside the Gaza Strip. I mean, there's still Hamas gunmen running around. They're still trying to sabotage the IDF, attack them, to sort of lure them into an area, with live fire, and then to ambush soldiers once they come in and ambush rescue soldiers. Has been the military strategy of Hamas since the beginning. Israel done surprisingly well. I mean, considering what Hamas had laid in store for the IDF, it's really amazing that the IDF has been so successful. Meanwhile, they have lost hundreds of soldiers in Gaza over the last year and 10 months. So it's just terrific. And in Israel, everybody knows when a soldier dies. People know the soldier, people know the family. Everything is 1 degree of separation away. So it always horrific. With regard to the Israel's impending attack in Gaza City. So Gaza City is really the last remaining stronghold. It's a little bit complicated and difficult to understand why Gaza City remains a stronghold, but the IDF is not attacked in Gaza City. When you see that you see buildings, knocked to the ground, entire fields of former cities that have been leveled. That's not Gaza City. Gaza City is the largest city in the middle of Gaza, and for the most part, the IDF has not conducted mass scale operations inside Gaza City. Why? It's believed that many of the hostages are there. At this point, at the time, it was believed that they were in Rafah, and they probably were. And then as Israel pushed citizens of Rafah to move out, so many of the hostages also were smuggled out. It's believed that the remaining hostages are inside Gaza City. And as I said, this is the last remaining stronghold. And we had this what was supposedly a bold cabinet decision about 2 weeks ago, where the cabinet voted to go ahead and to take over all of Gaza, right? That the IDF only controls about 75% of Gaza now, and that they should go in and control the remaining 25%, including Gaza City. And yet, even after that vote, we don't have an immediate attack into Gaza City. That we have this string of announcements. First, the cabinet approves the concept of attacking Gaza City. Then the prime minister saying, "I've seen the plans that the IDF has drawn up," as if they only now were drawing up plans to go into Gaza City, as if it never crossed the IDF's mind earlier on that they might have to go into the largest city inside Gaza if they want to win the war in Gaza. And now you're starting to see brigades are being mobilized around Gaza City, uh, and I've heard that perhaps it's another 2 weeks or more until that operation gets officially launched. So what you have to wonder is, how dedicated to this attack is the prime minister? Is the prime minister using the threat of a call up and the threat of a major attack on the remaining city, plus backing from the United States? And President Trump has continued to give his backing to Israel to do what it needs to do to conquer all of the Gaza Strip, to thoroughly defeat Hamas. Is the prime minister using this major threat of military force in order to try to get Hamas to relent and release the remaining hostages, right? And you've always had this tug of war between Israel's goal of getting the hostages back on the one and defeating Hamas on the other. You have had many military experts suggesting really since early on in this war that you can't accomplish both. The prime minister saying no, that he does feel that he can accomplish both. At the same time, if the goal was simply to take Gaza City, to conquer it early on, uh, it's troubling to assess why that hasn't been done until now. Why it hasn't been done until now, even after the vote, which was a couple of weeks ago, and it still sounds like the full scale attack in Gaza City is maybe 2 weeks off. Meanwhile, like organizations like the IPC stating that there is starvation in Gaza City. And somebody had asked me over this weekend, what came first? Did the IPC state that there was starvation in Gaza City, and now Israel's announcing it's going to go in? It's the opposite. Israel announced that it's going to go in, so now you have the international community saying, "Well, wait a second, there's starvation over there, so you can't go in." That's what's going on, and we'll see whether the IDF actually launches this mass scale operation in Gaza. If the IDF takes over complete control of the Gaza Strip, if the IDF finally reduces Hamas to nothing and takes over full administrative control of Gaza for the time being.
Yeah, Alex, reports indicate that that operation, if it does take place, will happen in the middle of September. And at the same time, Netanyahu, the prime minister, on Thursday issued instructions for negotiations to be held for the release of the hostages once again. At this point, none of the Israeli envoys have been sent, neither to Qatar or to Egypt. Nobody's left yet, but it looks like the prime minister still wants to see some sort of negotiations. At the same time, you had President Trump indicating during a press conference in the Oval Office on Friday that fewer than 20 hostages being held by Hamas are alive. It was believed until now that it was 20. Israel still says that it does not have any indication that it's less than 20. Not exactly sure where President Trump is getting his sources, but Israel is saying one or two of the hostages, there is a chance that they may be fighting for their lives at this juncture. Let's take a look at President Trump's remarks and then let's discuss.
I'm the one that got all of the hostages out. You got a lot of people out. If it wasn't for me, they wouldn't be out. I worked with Bibi and I worked with Steve Witkoff. But if it wasn't for me, you would have all these hostages would most likely be dead right now, every one of them. So they all come up here. They come in groups of 10, 12, 13, and many of them, and I've gotten to know a lot of them. They're great people. What they had to go through is incredible. But so now they have 20, but the 20 is actually probably not 20 because a couple maybe aren't around any longer. It's a terrible thing.
So there you have President Trump in the Oval Office saying he believes less than 20 hostages are alive. Alex.
Well, it's hard to make heads or tails of that kind of a statement when you say, fewer than 20. Yeah, Trump can just say that. Israel's saying assessing 20, Trump's assessing fewer than 20. Yeah, if Trump had said, 5 or fewer than 5, then you would see that there's a real difference. If Trump's saying fewer than 20, understanding, Trump's how Trump relates to these issues, what he probably means is like there's not a lot of hostages, probably around 20. So I wouldn't read too much into those statements. This is what the media does. They pick up on, the little subtleties of Trump's statements. I think with Trump, my understanding is, you have to follow the intent of the statements more than the precise accuracy of the statement. I'm not saying that Trump shouldn't be very accurate with his statements. He's the president of the United States. In the past, presidents would be extremely accurate with the numbers that they would put out. Another president would have had the exact number, would have wanted the exact number. Trump doesn't operate like that. So, if he could say around 20, approximately 20, fewer than 20, it doesn't necessarily mean a different intent on his part. So I wouldn't read too heavily into the number. Um, Certainly the idea that a few of them could be in life-threatening condition. I mean, we saw the photos of we talk about starvation in Gaza. The only people that are being intentionally starved in Gaza are hostages. We saw Abiyatar David, look with a picture of him before, looked like a strong, young, athletic build Israeli, and you see him reduced like just to his bones. I mean, you haven't seen pictures of that of Jews since the Holocaust. I mean, and he was being intentionally starved to death, and even was being forced in a video to dig what looked like his own grave. I mean, this is sick. It's just sick stuff that's going on, and intentional. It's not like what's happening in Gaza where humanitarian issue is a result of a brutal war. It's not the intent of a brutal war. Here, the intent was to take hostages. That was done intentionally when civilian areas were attacked intentionally on a holiday, a music festival, attacked intentionally for the purpose of killing as many people as possible and then taking as many hostages as possible. And now to film those hostages, use those videos intentionally as psychological warfare, starve hostages intentionally as psychological warfare on Israel, and policy of torturing the hostages. And I think ultimately, my understanding is, as much as Trump pays lip service to the hostages, and he has over and over again, and I think he's deeply sympathetic to the plight of the hostages. He talks about the hostages. He has met with the families of hostages. He's met with hostages who have been released, freed from Gaza. Ultimately, I believe that the president's priority is the defeat of Hamas as a terrorist organization in Gaza, and backing Israel with all it needs, including weapons, diplomatic support, public backing, in order to do that. I believe that the president wants Israel to do it and to accomplish it as quickly as possible, and even if that means that the hostages perish in the process. I think that the president of the United States backs Israel to win the war and understands that the hostages may die as a result. And that's not a pleasant idea. But from a military perspective, it probably makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, it's hard to re- res- allow, permit hostages to die in the process without doing everything that you can to possibly bring them back. But at the same time, uh, as Israel dithers with regards to its strategy inside Gaza, we hear the reports of soldiers dying. Um, because they're not going in with and finishing the job as quickly and thoroughly as possible. So you have to weigh, what, are you losing soldiers because you're trying to preserve the lives of dying hostages? And this is the difficulty, right? So, we're just trying to play armchair quarterback on this. And it's very complicated, and nobody really understands the pressures and the decisions that the war cabinet and the prime minister are being forced to make over here. I think a lot of Israelis, I think the president of the United States, for that matter, wants to see Israel, take Gaza City already, go in, just do that, do it, finish it, because the longer this war goes on, the worse Israel's diplomatic problems get. That's not to say that Israel's diplomatic problems are going to be cleared up the second the military operation is over, because we know that Hamas, even if they surrender, Okay. And even if some Hamas members leave the Gaza Strip, and even if Israel officially takes over, it's not going to be the end of terrorism inside Gaza as long as Gazans remain there. There's still guns. There's still people willing to shoot guns at IDF troops who will have to maintain that territory. So Israel's military problems will not end with an official end of conflict. Israel's diplomatic problems will not end with an official end of the conflict. Still, I think most people want to see these operations begin and conclude as quickly as possible. It may mean that some of these hostages will not come back alive. I mean, if we would have discussed this in the beginning of the war when 255 people were taken hostage and we didn't know how many were alive or how many were dead, if somebody would have come and said, you'll get back 147 of the hostages alive, would that be a good result? I think everybody would say that would be a miraculous result. And really that's happened already. Um, there's no incentive for Hamas to release these remaining hostages. Prime Minister is hoping that by threatening a large scale attack on Gaza City, that will provide the incentive to Hamas to release the hostages. But the longer this war goes on, the more toll on Israel's diplomatic standing, the more toll on the soldiers, the more psychological warfare with regard to the keeping of these hostages. It's difficult. It's just a difficult situation, and maybe there's a better way to do it. Maybe there is no better way to do it.
Alex, you just described the horrors of October 7th and everything that went with them, including the murder of 1,200 Israelis, the taking of 255 hostages, and everything else that we've seen since then. Yet you have a group of Orthodox rabbis, 80 of them, more or less, who are essentially drinking the Hamas Kool-Aid, spreading Hamas propaganda, whether they know it or not. And they're saying that this is for moral clarity in Gaza. They've called on the Israeli government to do everything in its power to prevent mass starvation. We've already debunked the myth of mass starvation in Gaza. They're also calling on the government to tackle what they call settler violence. So these 80 rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, as they consider themselves, are sending or have sent letters to the Israeli government saying, you have to do everything possible in order to take on these moral issues. And this story right here makes my blood boil. In the midst of a war where you can talk about how Israel has done everything in its power to create the lowest casualty ratio to combatant ratio in the history of modern urban warfare, whether it's sending in all of that aid, which is now sitting and rotting in the sun in most cases because of the UN not willing to deliver it, or whatever you want to discuss. This makes my blood boil, seeing these people willing to sign a letter, putting pressure on the Israeli government, giving Hamas a propaganda victory by seeing Jews with kippahs on their head, crochet kippahs on their head, to be clear, both in Israel and abroad, who are taking Israel to task in the midst of this war. This story makes me absolutely nuts.
Well, Josh, I certainly understand that. People ask me all the time. They say, Israel needs to do a better job of public relations. Israel, fails the PR war. The Arabs, they're always winning the PR war. This is example number one, exhibit A, of a reason why Israel ultimately can't win a PR war, because you have uh, supposedly Orthodox rabbis. And by the way, there's been a major progressive shift within the Orthodox movement. I'm not saying that all Orthodox are progressive. They certainly aren't, but you have more and more and more progressive modern Orthodox in the United States, even in Israel, who identify, with the left, even as the overwhelming majority of Orthodox. And there's a growing stream of many, many more Orthodox Jews than previously. And I would suggest the overwhelming majority of them are politically conservative. But within the modern Orthodox movement is this progressive arm. And they tend to side against the present Israeli government, which is a conservative government, a majority right-wing government. And on the basis of the identity politics, they unfortunately are undermining Israel's PR. Can you imagine Orthodox rabbis stating that Israel's not doing everything in its power? When you have the chair of the Urban Studies Department at West Point, John Spencer, stating that Israel does not have a policy of genocide, nor does Israel have a policy of starvation, that Orthodox rabbis that don't know the ground in Gaza, that don't aren't speaking on a daily basis to soldiers in Gaza, are undermining Israel's own cause. And don't think that anti-Semites around the world aren't saying, well, look at this letter by these Orthodox rabbis stating that Israel is committing a policy, or maybe committing, or is urging Israel not to commit a policy of starvation in Gaza. I mean, this is the exhibit A of why, and there's a lot of exhibits, by the way. There's a lot of different reasons, but this is a primary reason why Israel loses the PR war. And it's not only Orthodox rabbis. Now you also have some former heads of the intelligence agencies and the military and former prime ministers. I think the one thread that brings all these together is how they vote. Okay, they don't vote for Netanyahu. They didn't vote for Netanyahu. They wouldn't have voted for Netanyahu before this war began. Probably in America, I would imagine that none of these rabbis voted for President Trump. They all voted for Kamala Harris. I mean, I don't know it, but I can be sure that over 90%, voted for Democrats across the board in the last election. But they represent themselves as Orthodox rabbis, and they undermine Israel's PR. I mean, it's horrific. But this is what Israel's facing. You have these three battlefronts that Israel is waging at the same time. You have the physical battlefront. We talked about that. We were fighting in Gaza. We're fighting against the Houthis. We fought against Iran. We fought against Hezbollah. We operated in Syria. So that's the one. The second is the diplomatic battlefront. So we see Emmanuel Macron and others stating that they're going to recognize Palestinian statehood, and the ICJ, stating that Israel's committing genocide. You have the IPC is stating that Israel's committing starvation. This is the diplomatic front. And then you have this sort of internal domestic front. And it manifests itself in protests against the government inside Israel. It manifests itself with regard to who is organizing the protests, representing themselves as the Hostage Families Forum. And here abroad, you have Orthodox rabbis, and you have other organizations like the Jewish Federations of North America giving $1 million worth of aid into Gaza. You have an organization like Israel Aid facilitating millions of dollars of aid into Gaza, and they're doing this under the banner of moral clarity. And it is a complete perversion of morality, to be honest. Okay. And people have to understand that, what they say is, if you start to be too kind to your enemy, eventually, what's that phrase?
Too kind to the cruel, you become cruel to the kind. Alex, by the way, I saw some of the names on the list, and some of these people who signed that letter were also some of the Orthodox rabbis who supported the Oslo Accords, who supported the Gaza expulsion. You would think that this time around, after October 7th, they would learn their lesson, but it's exactly the opposite. And in terms of the Israeli leaders who are also doing tremendous damage to Israel on the PR front, you had former defense minister and chief of staff Moshe Boogie Ya'alon just the other day charging current defense minister Israel Katz to admitting that Israel's committing a war crime in the Gaza Strip because he decided that he was going to, or threatened he was going to turn Gaza City into Rafah or Beit Hanun. I mean, Israel was just in Rafah, we were just in Beit Hanun, yet somehow Boogie Ya'alon decides that, he made these statements, so this is obviously the defense minister admitting that Israel's committing a war crime when he said no such thing.
And this is a former right-wing hawk, stating that.
For about a week and a half.
Right, when you have Ehud Olmert, a former prime minister of Israel, going on to CNN stating that Netanyahu and his government are committing war crimes. Ehud Olmert used to be a right-wing hawk mayor of Jerusalem before he broke off to begin to be Ariel Sharon's deputy in the Kadima party, which is the ones that carried out the expulsion. And Ehud Olmert was the one who offered up 98% of Judea and Samaria to the Palestinians, as did his former colleague Ehud Barak, who served as defense minister under Netanyahu. But when he was the prime minister, offered up 95% of Judea and Samaria for Palestinian statehood. So you have these people that have been supporting left-wing policies even if they came from the ideological right wing. But what I'll tell you is that these are not really representative of the voting public in Israel. I have spoken to so many left wingers in Israel, people that supported Oslo, people that supported the withdrawal from Gaza, and none of them support the creation of a Palestinian state today. None of them believe that Israel's carrying out war crimes in Gaza. Everybody believes that Israel needs to finish the job. The country is moving further and further to the right. And what people like Ehud Barak and Bogi Alon, their hatred of Netanyahu supersedes what they think is solid policy. If they were sitting in the prime minister's chair, they would be doing the same thing that Netanyahu is doing. They're only opposing Netanyahu's policies because of the identity politics, because of the people that are doing them. But like we said, it just undermines Israel's ability to do PR. And it's not just them. And I want to state this also, it's most of the English language media that you are reading, consuming, watching from Israel. Times of Israel, Haaretz, all of them stating that, Israel is committing war crimes now, that Hamas is willing to release all. The Times of Israel just yesterday, I read an article, they stated explicitly that, Hamas has been willing to release all the hostages already for a long time. It's just that Netanyahu refuses to accept the deal to do it because he's got some, whatever motivations to continue the war. It's absurd. Okay. And what they're doing is irreparable harm to Israel's diplomatic image. And there's no accountability, right? Everybody wants to hold Netanyahu accountable. And there should be accountability for Netanyahu. He's the prime minister and he needs to take whatever accountability. But the left wing can do anything and everything to undermine Israel's diplomatic position, to undermine social cohesion, to sow disunity, and there's very little accountability. And there's nothing that you can do to stop Ehud Barak from stating what he's stating, for Ehud Olmert, Bogi Alon. There's nothing you can do. These rabbis, you can't do anything to them for just undermining Israel. It's just, how is Israel supposed to win a PR war when you have when you're being undermined at every stage?
Yeah, Alex, it makes me sick to my stomach. Just one more item here to discuss on the political level, but it's also obviously related to Gaza and the war and everything going on. You had opposition MK Benny Gantz over the weekend call on Prime Minister Netanyahu and other opposition leaders to establish a temporary emergency government tasked with tackling two of Israel's most urgent issues, according to Benny Gantz, securing the release of the remaining hostages and advancing legislation on the ultra-Orthodox military draft. From what I saw today, Yisrael Beitenu head Avigdor Lieberman said he was not so keen on the idea of forming this sort of emergency coalition. But we'll have to pay attention to this. You know that Netanyahu, I believe it's only 60 seats right now with the bolting of some of the ultra-Orthodox parties. What's your take on whether you think Netanyahu will bring Benny Gantz, who was with the government at one point, and his party was in the government? What's your take on whether he's going to bring Gantz back into this government, maybe to create perhaps more stability, or at least on paper, more stability?
Right. Remember, Israel had the right wing government, essentially similar to the right wing government that it has now before the war. And then with the war, Benny Gantz did the responsible thing and brought his party into a wider government to perpetrate the war. And yet, at a certain point in time, after many months, they pulled out of that government, hoping that pulling out of that government would crash Netanyahu. That's the whole purpose of a left-wing party joining into a right-wing government at this time. It's to create the illusion of stability in order to then pull out at a certain point, to then jolt the stability of that government and hope that that government will crash. Specifically, the idea is that, if they hope that they would lure Netanyahu, right? Okay, take us into the government, get a wider government. Then you have more stability to push out some of those right wing parties that are bothering you on the right, And then if any of them bolt the government, that's when Gantz would pull out of that government to crash it. I think what we're seeing in Israel now is the unofficial beginning of the election cycle. Okay, everybody's posturing. We saw last week. I know you didn't bring this up as a topic, but last week there was massive protests in the country. These protests are organized by the same people that organized the protests against judicial reforms, that are the same ones that organized the protests against Netanyahu during those 5 consecutive election cycles. This government has lasted beyond, I think, what most anybody on the left thought would happen. But actually, it's proved that a narrow, ideologically aligned government can be the most stable of governments because they're aligned and they have no place to go. Um, and yet now we're seeing that with the election is scheduled for about a year and 3 months from now, if it lasts that long. But chances are it's not going to last that long. Israel's going to have to pass a budget in the beginning of 2026. The government will have to pass a budget, and that budget, yeah, would probably be an austerity budget to pay for the war. We've seen Israel already in 2025 raise taxes. They might have to raise taxes again in 2026. There'll be a lot of budget cuts on the fringes of the budget. The smaller parties rely on those fringes of the budget. They for them, like being able to collect funds from the fringes of the budget is really what their whole purpose of entering a government to begin with. So there's not really going to be much incentive for Netanyahu or for any of these parties to pass a budget, which is going to be a harsh and cruel budget, likely. And if you don't pass a budget, that's a trigger for automatic elections. So chances are that Israel's going to be in elections in some part of the early part of next year. And perhaps it's to Netanyahu's advantage to go to elections earlier than later, so that new parties don't have the same opportunity to organize if it will be as if the election would be later in 2026. So because you're now starting to see um, election posturing taking place, the protest movement on the one hand, Benny Gantz, trying to crawl back to some sort of legitimacy in the eyes of the Israeli public. I mean, his stock has tanked since he left that government. And even just a week ago, he made a statement I think was very telling that the progressive left in Israel is trying to put a lot of money into campaigns to get him to drop out of politics because they recognize that the left doesn't really want Gantz to be their leader, and they put a lot of energy and effort during these 5 election cycles behind Benny Gantz as the main challenger to Netanyahu. I think in that second and third elections, Gantz was the head of a large alignment that really challenged Netanyahu with 30 seats at one point. Um, Over 30 seats in one of the elections. And then Netanyahu and Gantz ended up forming a unity government because there wasn't a clear winner. Now Yair Lapid seems to be the champion of the left wing in Israel, and who knows who will be the next champion, but they seem to have cycled through Gantz. Gantz has not proven himself to be a very viable leader for the Israeli left. So everybody just trying to demonstrate some relevance. What I'm nervous for, and we've already seen this, and it's already beginning to happen, is the divisiveness that comes along with the Israeli elections. One of the reasons why Hamas thought that they had an opportunity to attack on October 7th was because they saw the divisiveness taking hold in Israeli society during those judicial reform protests. And with the war, what did we see? We saw an immediate return to unity. I was talking about the Times of Israel and those other media. In the first couple months of the war, they were great. They were really stood behind Israel and behind Israel's legitimacy against Gaza, against Hamas in Gaza, against Iran. But now that they see that Gaza war continues to drag on, that the remaining hostages are proving difficult to recover, that Netanyahu's already attacked Iran, and that's already old news. That's already like in the far rear view mirror. Now everybody's just thinking about elections, and I think Israel needs to brace itself, and really Israel needs some leadership that promotes unity among the people, because the politicians are certainly not going to do it. And if you've had divisiveness before, this election could possibly be the most painful of all the elections that we've had in the last years, because we're on a pattern of political divisiveness, but now heap on top of that all of the pain of October 7th and the resulting war. And we just have to see how this plays out. But, it could be an ugly time this next period for Israel domestically. I hope that the Israeli people and Israeli leaders figure out a better path.
Amen to that. Unity is certainly the key. We are out of time. To be continued on that story and all the others. Alex, it's time for you to come home. That's it, man. It's getting lonely here in the studio. No offense to everyone behind the cameras, but it's getting lonely here.
That Israel's had, challenges diplomatically with me abroad. I have done some good work for JNS and also got some family time out here, which was very important. But God willing, returning to Israel this week, and I hope to see you in the studio for our next episode.
Sounds good. Have a safe trip home. I want to thank everyone behind the scenes here at JNS, Ryan Lifshitz, Yuri Svretsky, Esther Eden, and Zach Sickerman. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS, along with Alex Traiman, CEO. Please God, we'll be back in studio next week. So make sure you turn into Jerusalem Minute and make sure you go to JNS TV to check out all the amazing content that JNS has to offer. And of course, go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. Have a great week, everybody.